You are listening to Anvil of Redemption, written by Akumah and voiced over by Sara.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Chapter 1, The Unraveling. The air in Jamshedpur is thick with the scent of steel, oil, and the faintest hint of rust. The city, always in motion, never seems to sleep. The steel factories on the outskirts hum like monstrous giants, their smokestacks stretching into the sky, releasing clouds that taint the air with a heaviness that matches Ankit's mood. This city is built on industry, on machines that never stop working, grinding away at everything they touch. And in the midst of it all, there is Ankit, a teenager caught between the suffocating weight of his family's financial struggles and the burning desire to escape. His world feels mechanical too. The small house he shares with his parents, a tiny two-bedroom apartment tucked away on the edge of the city, is starting to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a prison. The creaking door and the walls that once seemed to protect him, now feels like they're closing in, suffocating him with the unspoken tensions that have begun to hang like a storm cloud over the family. His father, once a proud man, has been unemployed for months now after a mass layoff at the factory. His mother is barely home, working long hours at the local textile mill to make ends meet. Ankit's gaze shifts to the cracked window, where the fading light of evening casts long shadows across the street. His eyes flicker back to the worn wooden table where a pile of bills sits, each one a reminder of how much they owe, how much more they'll never be able to pay. The silence of their home is broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall, a reminder that time keeps moving, whether they're ready or not. He can't remember the last time he sat down for dinner with his parents. There's always something else pulling them in different directions: work, worry, the constant pressure to survive. But Ankit isn't like them. He knows he should be, but he's not. Unlike his father, who has spent his life working in the factories, Ankit doesn't want to get stuck in the grind. He wants to escape this place, to do something with his life beyond the cold steel of the factories and the constant hum of machines. He dreams of becoming an engineer, of making something of himself, but how can he? His dreams are always clouded by the harsh reality of their financial situation. He can't leave. Not yet. Not when his family needs him. Ankit has been working after school for months now, taking up odd jobs just to help. He doesn't mind, really. It's not the work he minds, it's the weight of expectation that hangs over him like a cloak. His father's disappointed gaze when he doesn't come home early enough to help, his mother's silent tiredness when she finally returns home late at night, these are the things that sit heavy on his chest. He wishes he could do more. He wishes he could fix everything, but how can he when he feels so lost himself? There has to be something I can do, something more than just this. The question lingers in his mind as he walks home from his job one evening. The sun has just begun to dip below the horizon, casting the city in a golden hue that quickly fades into twilight. As Ankit passes through the narrow alley near his house, his ears catch a hushed conversation. It's faint at first, like the murmurs of distant voices, but curiosity pulls him closer. He slips into the shadows, careful not to be noticed, and presses himself against the cool brick of the alley wall. Two men are standing there, their backs to him, speaking in low tones. One of them has a deep, gravelly voice, while the other speaks more cautiously. Ankit strains to hear. Project V, we need someone with insider knowledge, they'll never see it coming. The words hit Ankit like a jolt of electricity. Project V. He's heard rumors of powerful figures pulling strings behind the scenes in Jamshedpur, but this is the first time he's heard it mentioned so openly. He listens intently, every muscle in his body tensed. You know the situation, don't you? We can't afford any mistakes. Varma needs someone from the inside, someone they trust. The name Varma hangs in the air like an unspoken threat. Ankit's mind races. Varma? The name rings a bell. Is this the same Varma his father had mentioned in passing a few weeks ago? He can't be sure. His heart beats a little faster, a mixture of fear and curiosity rising within him. He wants to know more, but the men turn, their conversation abruptly cut off. Ankit's pulse quickens as he steps back, his breath coming in shallow bursts. He hurries home, but the words Project V echo in his mind, mixing with the ever-present worry about his family's future. The weight of the unknown presses down on him. When Ankit arrives home, Chloe is waiting for him outside. Her confident smile always feels like a breath of fresh air in a world that feels too heavy. They've known each other since childhood, shared everything from school gossip to late-night chats about their hopes and fears. Chloe's boldness has always been something Ankit admires, even if he doesn't always understand her. She knows how to carry herself, something Ankit wishes he could do more of. She's standing near the old wooden gate, her arms crossed, waiting for him. Her eyes light up when she sees him. "Hey, Ankit," she calls out, her voice a mix of concern and cheerfulness. "You look like you've had a long day." He smiles back, though it's a little strained. "You could say that." Chloe steps closer, her eyes scanning him carefully. She knows him too well. She's the first to notice when something's off, and right now, there's definitely something off. "You okay?" she asks, the question light but laced with concern. Ankit hesitates for a moment before nodding.
"Yeah.
Just tired. Work's been a lot lately." There's a pause, then Chloe casually mentions, "You know, someone came to me today, offering an opportunity. It's related to your family's situation, actually. They said they could help." Ankit feels a chill run down his spine. His heart skips a beat. He tries to mask it with a chuckle. "An opportunity? What kind of opportunity?" Chloe shrugs nonchalantly, but there's something in her eyes, something guarded. She's hiding something. Why does she look so off? "I don't know, it's just. I thought it was worth mentioning. Could be good for your family." Ankit forces a smile, though it doesn't reach his eyes. The words echo in his mind. Opportunity. Family. Help. But something about Chloe's tone unsettles him. As the conversation shifts, Ankit's mind races. The pieces are starting to come together, but the picture remains unclear. The next few hours pass in a blur. His father is home later than usual, and when he arrives, he's holding something in his hand, a letter. The handwriting is unfamiliar, but the name at the top sends a jolt through Ankit's spine, Varma. His father's face is unreadable as he reads the letter, his expression shifting between caution and something else, something Ankit can't quite place. Then, his father hangs up the phone, and Ankit hears him muttering something about a meeting. This can't be good. Ankit stands at the window, watching the darkened city. The hum of the factories continues in the background, but tonight, it feels different, like something is brewing just beneath the surface. The weight of the letter, of the unknown, presses down on his chest. He wonders if he's the one who has to uncover the truth before it's too late. The phone rings again, and Ankit hears his father's voice, strained, talking to Varma. The sound of his father's voice carries through the thin walls, low and strained. Varma, the name lingers in Ankit's mind like a shadow, dark and heavy. He presses his ear to the wall, straining to hear, but his father's words are muffled, and Ankit can't make out the conversation clearly. Still, the tension in the air is palpable. The door to his father's room creaks open, and Ankit quickly pulls away from the wall. His father walks out, his face a mask of quiet resolve. There's something unsettling in his movements, the way he avoids looking at Ankit. "Ankit, we need to talk." His father's voice is firm, but there's a flicker of unease in his eyes. Ankit nods, though his heart is racing. The weight of his father's gaze seems to deepen with every passing second. He's never seen his father like this before. The man who used to be a rock, a symbol of steady strength, now seems frail, almost vulnerable. "What's going on, Dad?" Ankit asks, though the words feel strange on his tongue. The distance between them, once so small, now feels vast. His father sighs deeply, lowering his gaze. "There's a man, Varma. He's offering me a job. A chance to fix everything for us." Ankit's mind races. Varma. That name. I don't know why, but it feels wrong. What does he want? Ankit asks, his voice barely a whisper. The question hangs in the air, the heaviness of it threatening to crush him. His father's hands tremble as he reaches for a glass of water on the table, taking a long sip before answering. "I don't know, son. He said we'd get money, a lot of it, but he needs something from me. A favor." Ankit swallows hard. A favor? The vague nature of his father's words sends chills down his spine. He wants to believe his father, wants to believe that they can escape this endless cycle of debt and struggle, but everything inside him is screaming that this isn't right. There's a catch. There's always a catch. What kind of favor? Ankit presses, though he feels a lump form in his throat. "I'm not sure yet," his father admits, the words tasting like failure. "But this could change everything for us, Ankit. You'll see." His voice is filled with a desperate hope, the kind of hope Ankit hasn't heard in a long time. Ankit clenches his fists, his mind whirling. Change everything. Could it really? He wants to believe in that possibility, but there's a nagging feeling deep within him, something telling him that this opportunity isn't as simple as it sounds. The night stretches on, and Ankit tosses and turns in his bed, unable to escape the thoughts that keep him awake. He hears the distant hum of the factories, the noise a constant reminder of the world outside, a world that has always been beyond his reach. This is it, Ankit. This is your chance to change everything. But how? What do I have to sacrifice to make it happen? The uncertainty gnaws at him, turning his thoughts in circles. He knows he has to do something. He can't just sit back and watch as his family continues to sink deeper into debt. But the path ahead seems unclear, shrouded in mystery, and every choice feels like a step into the unknown. The next day, Ankit can't shake the feeling that something is closing in on him. He heads to school, his steps heavy, his mind elsewhere. The crowded hallways of the school seem to swallow him up, the noise and laughter of his classmates a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. He spots Chloe in the courtyard, standing by the entrance, her eyes scanning the crowd as she waits for him. The sight of her, confident, unbothered, should ease his nerves, but instead, it makes his stomach churn. Chloe has always been the one person he's been able to rely on, the one person who understands him better than anyone else. But now, after yesterday's conversation, he feels the distance between them growing. Something has shifted, and Ankit doesn't know how to reach her anymore. "Hey, Ankit," Chloe says, her voice warm as she flashes him a smile. But there's something different in her eyes today, something guarded, something distant. "Hey," Ankit replies, his voice tight. He wants to ask her about what she said yesterday, about the opportunity she mentioned, but he can't seem to find the words. Chloe tilts her head, as if sensing his unease. "You okay? You look like you didn't sleep last night." Ankit forces a smile, but it's strained.
Yeah.
"Just stuff on my mind." He pauses, trying to choose his words carefully. "About yesterday, what was that about?" "You know, the job offer for my family?" Chloe's eyes flicker briefly, and for a moment, Ankit swears he sees hesitation in her gaze. But then, just as quickly, she masks it, flashing him a bright smile. Oh, don't worry about that. It's just something I heard about. Nothing big. I'm sure it's nothing. Ankit doesn't buy it. He knows Chloe too well. There's something she's not telling him, something more than just casual gossip. Chloe, he presses, his voice lower now. Why are you being so vague? You always tell me everything. Her smile falters for a second, but she quickly recovers, shrugging it off. I just don't want to get you worried over nothing, Ankit. But Ankit can't shake the feeling that this isn't nothing. That whatever Chloe is hiding is bigger than he can imagine. He watches her, searching her face for any sign of the truth, but she's always been good at hiding things. And now, it's as if a wall has gone up between them, one that Ankit can't break through. As the day stretches on, Ankit can't focus. Every time he looks at Chloe, he wonders if she's part of something bigger, something dangerous. What does she know that I don't? The weight of the conversation with his father is still pressing on his mind. That letter. The promise of money. And Varma, an elusive name that continues to haunt him. After school, Ankit heads home, his thoughts spinning with questions and doubts. The city of Jamshedpur feels colder today, the factories looming like silent giants, their watchful eyes always observing, always waiting. He enters the house to find his father sitting at the table, the mysterious letter in front of him. His mother is nowhere to be seen, probably still at work, just like always. The silence between them is thicker now, charged with an unspoken tension. Dad, I need to know more about this guy, Varma, Ankit says, his voice stronger than he feels. He needs answers. They deserve answers. His father looks up, his face hardening as he meets Ankit's gaze. I told you. He's offering us a chance. A chance to fix everything. Ankit steps closer, his pulse quickening. But at what cost, Dad? What does he want from you? His father hesitates, and for the first time, Ankit sees a crack in his father's armor. I don't know. But this could change everything for us. I need you to trust me, Ankit. But Ankit can't trust him, not yet. Not when the shadow of Varma looms over them all. As Ankit stares out the window at the darkened streets of Jamshedpur, the weight of everything presses down on him. The factories, the city, the secrecy, and the lies, he's trapped, but he's determined to find a way out. The game has begun, and I don't know if I'm ready for what comes next.
Akumah Audiobooks.
You are listening to Anvil of Redemption, written by Akumah and voiced over by Sara.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Chapter 2, The Tightening Noose. The sun filtered weakly through the curtains, casting pale streaks of light across Ankit's room. The faint sound of birds chirping outside did little to pierce the thick, suffocating silence in the house. Ankit lay in bed, his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling as his mind churned relentlessly. The phone call, the letter, the look in his father's eyes, all of it played on repeat in his head. He couldn't shake the image of his father walking past him last night, the ghost of a man who had once been his hero, now a stranger wrapped in secrets. Why doesn't he trust me? Ankit thought, his heart heavy with the weight of the uncertainty pressing on him. What's he hiding? The darkness that had hung over their home for weeks seemed to deepen, taking root in the pit of his stomach. The once lively dinners with his family, filled with laughter and stories, now felt like strained performances. His father, who used to carry an air of confidence, now looked weary, distant. His mother had retreated into her usual silence, focusing on the small tasks around the house. Even Chloe, his best friend, seemed to have pulled away. What's happening to us? Ankit's mind raced with these questions, but no answers came. He could still feel the edges of the conversation he'd overheard the night before, the conversation his father had tried so hard to hide. But it was there, sharp and clear in his memory, Varma. Varma. The name echoed like a drumbeat in his head. It didn't make sense. Varma wasn't just anyone. He was the shadow that loomed over everything, the kind of man who whispered through the back rooms of Jamshedpur, a figure wrapped in power, influence, and dark dealings. But his connection to his father? That part was still a puzzle Ankit couldn't solve. The letter. What did it mean? And the conversation of two men in the alley. He turned over, pushing the covers off himself. The coldness of the floor beneath his feet sent a shiver up his spine as he stood. His eyes caught the window, and for a moment, he just stood there, watching the day unfold outside. His thoughts were scattered, each one a flickering flame that refused to stay lit long enough to bring clarity. Ankit grabbed his phone from the nightstand and texted Chloe. "We need to talk." He hit send and stared at the screen. She had been acting strange lately, distant, as though the air between them had thickened. Maybe he was imagining it, but their friendship felt strained. He remembered the way she had avoided him at lunch, the way she kept leaving early, always with a hurried excuse. But why? Had she known something? Was she involved in whatever was going on with his father? He didn't have time for doubts. He needed answers. Ankit stood, running a hand through his hair as he dressed quickly. The gnawing sense of fear and urgency spurred him forward, leaving him little time to think about the consequences of his actions. At school, the morning passed in a blur. The halls felt unusually quiet, the usual chatter of students drowned out by the hum of his own thoughts. Ankit couldn't focus. Every time he looked around, he half expected to see someone watching him, waiting for him to make the wrong move. His own paranoia made him jump at shadows. The bell rang for lunch, and Ankit walked toward the cafeteria, eyes darting to the side, searching for Chloe. She wasn't at her usual spot. Ankit's stomach tightened, and a wave of unease washed over him. He scanned the room again. She was sitting at a table by the window, her back turned to him. There was no one else with her, but the way she sat, slumped slightly, her head lowered as if in thought, felt off. Is she avoiding me? Ankit's steps faltered as he approached. The idea lingered, heavy and unwelcome. What was going on? He took a deep breath and walked over to her, forcing a calm smile. "Hey," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Can we talk?" Chloe looked up, startled. For a split second, Ankit saw the flicker of something in her eyes, something he couldn't quite name. It was a flash of discomfort, maybe even guilt. But it was gone before he could fully grasp it. "Sure," she replied, her tone light but lacking its usual warmth. She pushed her tray of half-eaten food to the side and gestured for him to sit. "About last night," Ankit began, his voice low. I need to know something." Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes briefly scanning the room before settling back on him. "What about it?" Her voice was casual, but there was an edge to it, a tension that made Ankit's nerves buzz with suspicion. "That letter," Ankit paused, watching her face carefully for any sign of recognition. "Did you know anything about it? The one from Varma?" Chloe stiffened. Her hands, which had been resting on the edge of the table, clenched into tight fists. She seemed to struggle with her response, her gaze flickering away before she finally spoke. "Varma," she said, her tone too casual, too dismissive. "Oh, it's probably just some scam. You know how people like that are, always trying to take advantage of someone when they're down." Ankit felt a chill run down his spine. Her words didn't sit right with him. The way she dismissed it so easily didn't match the tension in her eyes. He could tell she was hiding something. "You're not telling me the whole story, Chloe," he said, his voice hardening. "Why are you acting like this?" Like you're trying to avoid talking about it. She froze, and in that moment, Ankit knew. Something was off. Chloe knew more than she was letting on. Her discomfort, the way she kept shifting her gaze, everything pointed to the fact that she was hiding something. Was she involved with Varma in some way? Had she known about his father's connection to the man all along? I don't know, Ankit, she said finally, her voice quiet but strained. Maybe you're overthinking it. Just forget about it. It's not important. But Ankit wasn't listening anymore. His thoughts raced as he absorbed her words. She's lying. There was no other explanation. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Chloe's eyes widened in surprise, but he didn't wait for her to say anything else. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his mind buzzing with a mixture of betrayal and confusion. What is going on, Chloe? After school, Ankit's mind was a storm of questions. The rest of the day had been a blur. He could barely focus on the lessons, his thoughts constantly drifting back to the conversation with Chloe and the growing sense of unease that had settled over him. The feeling of being watched, the gnawing suspicion that something was not right, was becoming harder to ignore. That night, after his family had gone to bed, Ankit sat at his desk, the dim light of his lamp casting long shadows across the room. He opened his laptop and began to search for anything he could find about Varma. Hours passed, the clock ticking away the night as Ankit sifted through articles and public records. What he found sent a chill through him. Varma wasn't just a businessman. He was a fixture in Jamshedpur, a powerful, influential man with ties to industries ranging from steel to real estate. But it wasn't just his wealth that caught Ankit's attention. It was the whispers of a project, a shadowy venture called Project V. The more he read, the more his stomach twisted. Project V wasn't just a business deal. It was a network of corruption, secrecy, and exploitation. Land deals that were questionable at best, labor practices that bordered on inhumane, and environmental violations that were buried under layers of bureaucracy. And it was all tied to Varma. Ankit's breath caught in his throat. Is this why my father is involved with him? He thought. Is this what he's getting us into? The weight of the truth hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about money. This was about something far darker, far more dangerous. And Ankit had unknowingly stepped right into the middle of it. His mind raced. He had to confront his father. But what if his father knew more than he was letting on? What if he was already in too deep? Ankit closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, staring out the window. The night was thick with silence, the shadows stretching long across the street. In that quiet, the danger felt closer than ever. The noose was tightening, and Ankit had no idea how to break free. But one thing was clear. He couldn't let this go. Times. Ankit stood at the window of his room, his eyes fixed on the sleek black car parked across the street. It had been there for hours, unmoving, like a shadow that refused to blend into the quiet neighborhood. The tinted windows reflected the pale light of the late afternoon, but it was impossible to tell who sat inside. A chill ran down his spine as he observed the driver, his silhouette barely visible through the rearview mirror. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Is it connected to Varma? The question gnawed at him, tightening its grip with every passing minute. The more Ankit thought about it, the more certain he became. The car's presence, the way it lingered on the street just outside his house, he had seen that before in movies, in stories about people whose lives were tangled in webs of secrets and lies. But this wasn't a movie. This was his life. He turned away from the window, his mind spinning. What had he gotten himself into? What was his father involved in? And more importantly, what did Varma want with them? The questions spiraled, each one leading to more questions, but no answers. The weight of uncertainty felt suffocating, like an invisible force pressing down on his chest. His father had been so defensive when he confronted him last night. That anger, that frustration in his voice, Ankit had seen it before, but never aimed at him. His father was a man of few words, someone who avoided confrontation. But last night, he snapped. The hollowness in his father's words still echoed in his mind. "It's just an opportunity, Ankit. We need this." His father had said it so firmly, like it was the only truth that mattered. But it didn't feel right. It felt like a lie. The dinner that followed had been unbearably silent. His mother had been quiet, as always, her eyes downcast as she picked at her food. She hadn't asked any questions, hadn't pushed for answers. But Ankit knew her too well, she was scared. She didn't want to know what was going on. She just wanted to keep things the way they were, safe and normal. But that was impossible now. The world had shifted beneath them, and Ankit could feel it, even if no one else could. He couldn't bring himself to talk to her about it. The last thing he wanted was to drag her into whatever this was. But he couldn't ignore the feeling gnawing at him, the feeling that they were already in too deep. With a sigh, Ankit sank onto his bed, running his hands through his hair in frustration. He had to find out more. The mystery surrounding Varma and the Project V was like a puzzle with missing pieces, and the more he dug, the more he realized that everything was connected in ways he couldn't yet understand. "I can't let it go. Not now." He had already spent hours at the library, poring over old news articles and public records. He had to find a way to connect the dots. Varma's name kept appearing, always in the context of business ventures, investment deals, and high-profile acquisitions. But there were whispers of something darker, something hidden beneath the surface. Project V. The words echoed in his mind. There was barely any information on it, but the few articles he found mentioned it in passing, always in hushed tones. The project was linked to illegal land deals, exploitative labor practices, and environmental violations. It seemed like every trail led back to Varma. The more he learned, the more uneasy he became. What was his father's role in all of this? Why had Varma been so insistent on meeting with him? Ankit's stomach churned as he thought about it. He had to know more. He had to find out what Varma was really after. But every time he tried to ask his father, the conversation was shut down. The walls between them were getting thicker, harder to break down. His father was closing off, and Ankit was left standing outside, unable to reach him. The next day, Ankit's determination only grew. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. He had to confront Chloe. The growing distance between them was too obvious to ignore. She had been avoiding him for days, finding excuses to leave school early or sit with other people during lunch. The subtle shift in their friendship didn't sit right with Ankit. Something was wrong, and Chloe was involved somehow. He had always trusted her, always thought of her as someone who would stand by him no matter what. But now, the silence between them felt like a wedge driven between them, pushing them further apart. Ankit couldn't just let it go. He had to know if she knew something about the letter, about Varma, about the things his father was hiding. During lunch, he found her sitting alone in the cafeteria, staring at her phone with a vacant expression. It was a rare moment when she wasn't surrounded by her usual group of friends, and Ankit saw it as his chance. He walked over to her table, his heart beating faster with each step. "Chloe," he said softly, trying to keep his voice steady. "Can we talk?" She looked up, her eyes briefly meeting him before she quickly glanced away. There was an unmistakable unease in her expression, and it made Ankit's heart drop. She didn't respond immediately, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of her phone. Is everything okay? Ankit asked, his voice betraying his concern. You've been distant lately. She let out a soft sigh, clearly uncomfortable. It's nothing, Ankit. I've just been busy with stuff. You know how it is. Ankit wasn't convinced. Why was she acting so weird? Something wasn't right. Do you know anything about the letter from Varma? He asked, his voice firmer now. You're the only one who might know why my dad is meeting with him. I don't understand why he won't talk to me about it. Chloe froze at the mention of Varma's name. For a moment, her eyes darted around the cafeteria, and Ankit could see her trying to hide the unease in her gaze. She hesitated before responding, her voice too casual. Ankit, I don't think you should worry about it. It's probably just some scam trying to take advantage of your dad's situation. You know how these things go. But Ankit could hear the faint tremor in her voice, the edge that didn't belong. She's lying. You're not being honest, Chloe, he pressed, unable to hide the hurt in his voice. Why don't you want to talk about it? Chloe's face flushed, and she looked down at her hands, avoiding his gaze. I don't know what you're talking about, okay? It's not a big deal. Ankit stared at her, his mind racing. He could feel the walls coming up between them, walls he didn't know how to break down. Why won't she tell me the truth? Chloe, I need you to be honest with me, he said, his voice softening. Please. But she shook her head, her expression hardening. I can't help you with this, Ankit. Just leave it alone. Ankit's stomach twisted in frustration. He didn't understand. Why was she acting like this? He had always thought of Chloe as someone who would be there for him, no matter what. But now, he was beginning to question everything. As he left the cafeteria, his mind was spinning. He didn't know who to trust anymore. His father was keeping secrets from him, and now, Chloe was shutting him out. The walls around him were closing in, and he felt more alone than ever. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Ankit couldn't concentrate on anything. His thoughts kept drifting back to Chloe's reaction, to the black car parked outside his house, to the growing sense that something terrible was coming. He didn't know how much longer he could ignore the tension building around him. When he got home that evening, his eyes went straight to the window. The black car was still there, parked across the street, its presence like a silent threat. Ankit's heart pounded as he stared at it. They're watching me. Watching us. He couldn't ignore it anymore. He had to find out the truth. And no matter what it cost him, he would. The stakes were too high, and his family was already too deep in a web of lies and secrets that Varma had spun. The only thing left to do was fight back. That night, as he lay in bed, the weight of everything pressing on his chest, Ankit made a decision. He wouldn't wait any longer. He would uncover the truth about Varma, about Project V, about his father's involvement, and he would do whatever it took to protect his family, even if it meant facing the darkness head-on. The noose was tightening around him, but Ankit had made up his mind. He was going to unravel it, no matter the cost.
Akumah Audiobooks.
You are listening to Anvil of Redemption, written by Akumah and voiced over by Sara.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Chapter 3, Confronting Shadows. The air inside Ankit's home felt thick with unspoken words, a weight that pressed down on him every time he stepped through the door. It had been days since the confrontation with his father, and it was as though a chasm had opened between them, one that seemed impossible to bridge. His father, who had once been his rock, now seemed a shadow of the man he once admired. Ankit's eyes lingered on the worn-out chair where his father used to sit, the one near the window where he would sip tea while reading the newspaper in the mornings. Now, it was empty, as it had been for days. The house felt colder than usual, as if even the walls were pulling away from him. Is this how it ends? Ankit thought, sitting at the edge of his bed, his hands trembling slightly as they rested on his knees. Am I losing him? The silence between them had grown deafening, louder than any argument could have been. His father refused to acknowledge the weight of what he had said, his dismissive remarks, the way he had avoided Ankit's questions. The truth was something he refused to face, and now Ankit was caught in the aftermath of their fractured relationship. Guilt gnawed at him constantly. If I'd just kept quiet, things might have been different. Ankit's mind replayed the argument in an endless loop. His words had come out all wrong, laced with anger and frustration. His father had never looked at him the same way after that. It was as if Ankit had crossed an invisible line, and now, there was no going back. The sound of his phone vibrating on the nightstand broke through his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. It was a message from Chloe, but it was brief. We need to talk. The words were like a slap in the face. He hadn't seen Chloe at school for the past few days, and now this. A flicker of hope sparked in his chest, only to be quickly extinguished by the nagging feeling that this conversation was not going to be the reconciliation he so desperately craved. He sat there for a few moments, unsure of what to do, before typing back, "When? I can't keep waiting for things to get better on their own. I need answers." His stomach churned at the thought. He hated feeling so isolated, as if everyone in his life was slipping away from him. His relationship with Chloe had been his anchor through all of this, but now, she was distancing herself from him too. As he hit send, Ankit's gaze drifted to the photo of his family on the wall, the three of them standing together at his birthday, his father's hand on his shoulder. The smile in the picture felt hollow now. He wasn't sure who he was anymore. Maybe I'm just like them, hiding secrets, lying to myself. The next day at school, Ankit wandered the hallways in a haze. His classmates passed by without a second glance, their lives continuing on without a care for the storm brewing in his. He could feel the weight of Chloe's absence, the empty space where their friendship had once been. The quiet hum of the school's fluorescent lights seemed to amplify his sense of loneliness. I don't even know who I can trust anymore, he thought bitterly, gripping his books tighter. Every corner he turned felt like another opportunity for his life to spiral further out of control. Maybe it's better this way, no one knows the truth. Maybe I should just forget it all, let it go. He didn't even realize he had reached his next class until he saw Chloe standing by the door. She was talking to someone, her back to him. The sight of her, the way she held herself so confidently, only reminded him of the growing distance between them. Why can't you just talk to me? He wanted to shout the words, but they caught in his throat. Chloe glanced over her shoulder, meeting his gaze for a brief moment. The look she gave him sent a shiver down his spine. It was cold, distant, a far cry from the warmth that had once defined their friendship. She turned back to the person beside her without a word, dismissing him like he was a ghost. This isn't right, Ankit thought. He wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but his feet felt like lead. He was stuck in a place between wanting to fix things and fearing the truth that Chloe might be hiding from him. I think she is definitely involved and keeping things from me. After school, he found himself walking toward the steel factory his father had worked at years ago. The factory, a decaying relic of a bygone era, loomed ahead, a silent testament to the time when it had been a pillar of the community. Now, it was little more than a forgotten place, abandoned and broken down. But Ankit knew that Varma's involvement with it was no coincidence. His father had spoken about it with such reverence when he was younger, almost as if the factory had been the source of all their problems, and their solutions. The air smelled of rust and old metal as Ankit stepped through the factory's gates. The place had once been full of life, but now it was eerily silent. The rusting machinery and broken windows told the story of a place that had once been prosperous but had fallen into neglect. Every step he took echoed in the cavernous hallways, as though the very walls were trying to keep their secrets hidden. He wandered deeper into the facility, feeling like an intruder in a place that held too many unanswered questions. "What am I looking for?" he asked himself, unsure of what he expected to find. The walls seemed to close in around him, as if urging him to leave. And then he found it, a small pile of dusty papers hidden in the corner of a long-forgotten room. His heart skipped a beat as he approached the stack, the papers yellowed with age and covered in dust. As he flipped through them, his hands shaking, he realized that these weren't just old documents, they were records of something much darker. His eyes narrowed as he saw the mention of Project V, a name that had haunted him ever since he first heard it. His suspicions about Varma had been right. The factory, once a place of pride, had been complicit in something much more sinister. Forced labor, hazardous materials, illegal operations, all hidden under layers of bureaucracy. Varma's reach extended far beyond what Ankit had imagined. "This is bigger than I thought," Ankit realized, his mind racing. But with that realization came a surge of determination. He could feel the weight of the truth in his hands, and he knew he couldn't stop now. As he walked back home, the message from Chloe still fresh in his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. When he stepped inside his room, he saw something out of place, an old, brown package sitting on his desk. No note, no sender. Just the package. His fingers trembling, Ankit opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with a cryptic message: "Stop digging, or you'll lose more than you think." Ankit's breath caught in his throat. The weight of the warning settled in, a chill running down his spine. This was no coincidence. Someone was watching him, someone with the power to make good on their threat. What have I gotten myself into? The question lingered in his mind as he stared at the note. The factory, Chloe, Varma, it was all connected, and he had to keep going. He couldn't stop now. "I won't stop." With that resolve, Ankit made a silent vow: the truth would come to light, no matter the cost. Ankit sat in his room, the weight of the factory's secrets pressing down on him, heavier than ever. The small, dim light from his desk lamp cast long shadows across the room, turning everything into a labyrinth of edges and corners. His hands trembled slightly as he sifted through the documents he had found hidden in the dusty corner of the factory. The words on the pages were like poison, each line reinforcing his worst fears about Varma and his true intentions. But there was something else there too, a cold, undeniable truth. Varma wasn't just a businessman. He was the architect of a criminal empire, one that had woven itself into the fabric of Ankit's life without him ever knowing. The door to his room creaked, and Ankit froze, his heart racing. He had been so consumed by the discovery that he hadn't heard his mother's soft footsteps approaching. She stood in the doorway, her face a mask of concern, though her eyes betrayed a quiet desperation. She always looked tired these days, as if the years were pulling at her with an unseen hand. "Ankit," she said softly, her voice fragile. "You've been cooped up in here all day. Is everything all right?" Ankit wanted to lie. To tell her that everything was fine, that the world wasn't falling apart around him. But his thoughts were a storm, and no matter how hard he tried, the truth kept breaking through. He couldn't hide it from her anymore, not when his father was barely speaking to him, not when Chloe refused to even look at him. And especially not now, when the dark forces of Project V were closing in on him from all sides. "I'm fine, Ma," he replied, though his voice felt hollow even to his own ears. She stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the piles of papers on his desk. There was something about the way she looked at him that made him feel exposed, like she could see right through him. Maybe she could. She always had a way of knowing when I was hiding something. Her gaze lingered on the factory documents, her brow furrowing. "What are these?" she asked, her voice suddenly tight. Ankit felt his stomach churn. He didn't want to involve her in this mess. His mother had enough to deal with, trying to keep the family together after his father's recent mood swings, the strain of their financial struggles, and the growing pressure of life in Jamshedpur. She didn't need to know about Varma or Project V. But he couldn't keep it from her forever. The truth was too big, too dangerous, and it was slowly pulling him under. "They're nothing," Ankit said, but the lie felt thin, like it would disintegrate under her gaze. His mother didn't buy it. She stepped closer, her hands reaching out to gather the papers, but he quickly shoved them aside, instinctively guarding them. A bitter silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. The air in the room felt suffocating, and Ankit's chest tightened. "I don't want you getting involved in whatever this is, Ankit," she said, her voice trembling. "Your father, he's been under so much pressure lately. We don't need more problems." "I know, Ma," he whispered, his voice barely audible. He had heard the same words before, every time his father grew distant, every time the weight of their situation grew too heavy to bear. "But I have to do something." She shook her head, her face full of worry. "I understand, but there's nothing you can do. We can't change what's happening. Your father's he's been different lately. And I don't know how much longer he can keep holding on." Her voice cracked, and Ankit saw the raw fear in her eyes. For a moment, everything inside him froze. His mother's pain cut deeper than any of the secrets he had uncovered. He could feel her fragility, her uncertainty. She was just as lost as he was. She had no answers, no solution to the tangled mess that was their life. And that realization sent a chill through his bones. But the truth was still there, staring at him in the form of the factory's documents. Varma was a part of their lives whether they liked it or not. The conspiracy that stretched through their community was a dangerous thread that had woven its way into their home. He couldn't stop now. "Ma," Ankit whispered, "I have to find out the truth." She closed her eyes as if bracing herself for something. When she opened them again, there was a fleeting moment of understanding between them. But then, just as quickly, her gaze hardened, and she took a step back. "I can't help you, Ankit," she said, her voice firm now. "But I won't stop you either." Ankit felt a sharp pang of guilt. His mother's eyes seemed to hold everything she couldn't say, the fear, the sadness, the overwhelming sense of helplessness. But there was also something else. A small flicker of trust. She might not agree with his actions, but she knew, deep down, that this was something he had to do on his own. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Just, be careful," she whispered. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Ankit alone once again. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The silence in the room felt louder now, as if the weight of the conversation was pressing down on him, filling every corner. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady his racing thoughts. "I'm doing this for them," he thought, his fingers trembling as they hovered over the stack of documents. "For my family. For everyone who could get caught in this mess if I don't stop it." But there was a part of him, deep down, that wondered if it was already too late. Varma's reach was vast, his power seemingly endless. Could Ankit really fight someone like him? Could he truly expose the truth without losing everything in the process? His mind was a whirlwind of questions, but in the end, one thought cut through the storm, as sharp as a knife. "I have to keep going." The sound of the doorbell broke his reverie. His heart leapt in his chest. Someone was at the door. He stood up quickly, his mind racing. Could it be Chloe? Or maybe someone else who knows about the investigation? He moved cautiously toward the door, his pulse quickening with each step. The last thing he expected was to find another small brown package sitting on the doorstep. It was unmarked, the paper old and worn, as if it had been handled multiple times before being delivered here. Ankit's stomach twisted into knots. His instinct screamed at him to turn back, to ignore it, but he picked up the package anyway. Inside, there was a single folded piece of paper with a message scrawled across it in jagged handwriting. "Stop digging, or you'll lose more than you think." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. A chill ran down his spine, and for the first time since this investigation had started, Ankit felt truly afraid. "This is the second package with the same message, but I haven't even left the house after coming home. This is troubling, they're watching me. Someone's watching me." The message was a threat. Varma's hand was closing in on him, and the walls were closing in fast. Ankit stood frozen on the doorstep, the cold night air biting at his skin. His heart was pounding in his chest, and his thoughts were clouded by the rising fear. The message had made one thing clear: there was no turning back now. The question wasn't whether he could stop this anymore. It was whether he could survive the storm he had just stepped into. And as he turned to head back into the house, the shadows inside him grew longer, darker, until there was no escaping them.
Akumah Audiobooks.
You are listening to Anvil of Redemption, written by Akumah and voiced over by Sara.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Chapter 4, The Unseen Hand. Ankit stood in the dim glow of his bedroom, pacing restlessly. The documents he'd discovered in the factory felt like a weight pressing against his chest. His mind kept circling back to the same thoughts: Project V, Varma, and the dark secrets buried within the corporate empire he controlled. The documents were encrypted for a reason. What is Varma hiding? And what those guys in the alley meant by Varma needs people with trust. Each passing hour without cracking the code felt like a failure, one that might cost someone, perhaps even him, dearly. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with the tension of unanswered questions. I can't back down now. I can't let this go, not after what I've seen. The thought of his family, especially Chloe, held him back from plunging deeper into this dark rabbit hole, but he couldn't stop now. His curiosity burned brighter than ever. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders. But every step forward felt like a step toward greater peril. He cast another glance at the encrypted files sprawled across his desk. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but doubts crept in. Am I ready for what I might find? Just then, his phone buzzed. Ankit's heart skipped a beat as he picked it up. The message on the screen was simple, yet chilling. I know what you're after. Meet me at the old temple at midnight. You won't be alone for long. A shiver ran down his spine. The unknown sender, the cryptic message, the implications, it all felt like a trap. And yet, a gnawing instinct told him he had no choice but to follow the lead. His mind raced. Varma has eyes everywhere. Someone else knows something. Someone who might be able to help, or someone who's luring me into danger. What if it's a trap? What if I'm walking right into the lion's den? Despite the warnings his gut instinct screamed at him, Ankit couldn't let the opportunity slip by. What if they have the answers I need? What if this is the key to exposing everything? The minutes passed like hours as Ankit wrestled with the decision. Finally, he grabbed his jacket and left his room, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway of the house. The night felt unusually quiet as he stepped outside, his breath visible in the cool air. The old temple, he thought, feeling a wave of unease wash over him. It was a place he hadn't visited in years, a forgotten relic on the edge of town. Once a place of refuge for him during childhood, it now seemed eerily forsaken. Why now? Ankit's mind buzzed with uncertainty as he drove through the winding streets of Jamshedpur, the headlights of his bike slicing through the inky darkness. The temple stood at the far edge of the city, its silhouette barely visible against the backdrop of the sprawling forest. As he pulled up to the temple, his headlights illuminated the structure in a haunting, cold light. The once majestic stone walls were now cracked and weathered, and thick vines crept up like fingers reaching toward the heavens. The scent of damp earth and decay lingered in the air. I want to turn back. I shouldn't be here, he thought, his hands gripping the bike's handle tighter. But something deeper pulled him forward. He wasn't going to back out now. Ankit unmounted out of the bike, the gravel crunching underfoot. The temple loomed ahead, its grand entrance dark and foreboding. He approached slowly, each step heavier than the last. His heart thudded in his chest, louder than ever. Who is waiting for me here? The sound of distant crickets and the rustle of leaves swirled around him, heightening the eerie atmosphere. As Ankit reached the entrance, he hesitated, listening for any sign of life. There was nothing. The air was thick with the silence of abandonment. Why is this place so dead? He pushed open the heavy wooden doors, which creaked in protest. The inside of the temple was even darker, a faint musty scent hanging in the air. The walls, once adorned with intricate carvings, were now chipped and forgotten. The remnants of old incense smoke lingered, mixing with the earthy odor of mildew. Ankit called out tentatively, "Hello?" His voice echoed in the emptiness, bouncing off the walls before dissipating into silence. There was no reply, just the quiet murmur of the wind outside. I'm wasting my time, Ankit thought. He began to turn, ready to leave, but just then, a low voice sliced through the stillness. You shouldn't have come. Ankit froze, his breath catching in his throat. His eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of the voice. From the shadows near the altar, a figure stepped forward, clad in a long black coat, the lower half of her face obscured by a scarf. Her presence seemed to fill the room, commanding attention despite her small stature. Ankit's pulse quickened. Who is she? The woman's sharp eyes glinted in the dim light, calculating, yet there was something more, urgency, desperation, perhaps fear. She moved toward him with deliberate steps. You're Ankit, right? She asked, her voice low and careful. He nodded cautiously. Who are you? What's going on here? The woman hesitated for a moment before responding, I'm Aisha. I used to work for Varma. I know everything about Project V, and what it really is. Ankit's mind raced. Varma? His thoughts raced back to the encrypted documents he'd found, the ones that seemed to connect Varma to something far darker than mere corporate interests. Aisha's eyes flicked nervously around the room, as if expecting someone to burst through the door at any moment. Her voice dropped lower. Are you really sure about crossing the line and knowing the unknown? Because after I tell you about it, you will become their target too. Ankit looked into her eyes with determination as he clenched his fists. I'm sure. Very well then. Your knowledge about Varma isn't even half of it. Project V isn't just about illegal activity in the factory. It's about something much worse. Varma is testing a new technology, something that manipulates human memory. She paused, as if gauging his reaction. Ankit took a step back. This is definitely something out of a student's reach. Memory manipulation? What? His voice came out hoarse. What do you mean? Aisha stepped closer, her tone growing more urgent. It's a device, designed to alter memories. It's supposed to make people completely malleable, obedient, and controlled. Her words hit Ankit like a blow. What is he doing? I didn't know the full extent of it when I first joined, thinking it's just another regular job, she continued. But when I found out, I tried to warn people. Varma had me silenced. Ever since, I've been on the run. Before Ankit could respond, the air around them shifted. He heard the faint sound of footsteps in the distance, and a sharp beam of light sliced through the temple's darkness. Aisha's eyes widened. She glared at Ankit, so he is also not trustworthy after all. No, that can't be it. She suggested this boy to be part of us personally. Aisha felt relieved when she looked at Ankit's scared face, but she didn't have time to contemplate these issues now. We need to go. Now. Aisha instructed. The moment she spoke, a harsh voice echoed from the shadows outside. Spread out and search for her. Ankit's heart pounded in his chest. He barely had time to react before Aisha shoved him behind a pillar. The sound of boots scraping against the stone floor grew louder, and then the faint click of rifles could be heard. The door flung open. They are Varma's men, Aisha muttered under her breath. You take the left exit, someone will contact you soon. What about you? Don't worry about me, I have escaped from them multiple times. Now, leave quickly. We don't have much time. Times. Ankit's heart was a thunderous drumbeat in his chest. He escaped successfully without getting caught. It's good that I hid my bike in the bush. He murmured to himself. The park around him blurred into a haze of muted colors, the streetlights casting faint halos of yellow light against the cool night air. His mind was consumed with Aisha's words, each one sinking deeper into his consciousness, settling like shards of glass. Varma knew about our meeting point. How? Although I'm safe now, the danger has shifted from the shadows to my very doorstep. I can't go back to pretending like everything's okay, he thought bitterly. Not when I know the truth. The idea of letting Varma's empire grow unchecked churned inside him, an insistent and gnawing thought that refused to be ignored. He had to act. His phone buzzed again. A quick glance at the screen revealed another text from the same unknown number. This time, it read, "You've made the right choice. But be careful, the next move is crucial." Ankit's fingers tightened around the phone. Who the hell is this? He swiped through his messages, desperate for any clue that could lead to answers, but there was nothing more than cryptic warnings and threats. This feels like a game, Ankit mused, the bitterness in his thoughts seeping through. And I'm not sure I even know the rules anymore. A shiver ran through him, the cool breeze brushing against his skin like the faint touch of an unseen hand. The darkness around him seemed to press in, thick with the weight of unknown consequences. For a long moment, Ankit simply stood there, unsure of what to do next, caught between his fear and his relentless need to uncover the truth. His phone buzzed once more, pulling him from his thoughts. He quickly unlocked it, his breath catching in his throat as he read the new message, "Meet me at the old mill. Tomorrow. Midnight. Don't tell anyone." Ankit stared at the words. This must be the person Aisha talked about. The old mill, huh? Another abandoned building in our city. But the message's demand to keep quiet sent another ripple of suspicion through him. Is there really a need for this much secrecy, if we are going to meet anyway? The old mill was located on the outskirts of town, long since abandoned and left to decay. The place had once been a hub of industry, churning out goods for local businesses, but now, it stood silent and decrepit, with broken windows and crumbling stone walls. The moonlight barely filtered through the trees as Ankit made his way toward the mill, his every step cautious, his breath shallow in the cool night air. His mind raced, replaying everything Aisha had told him, each detail feeding into the dark narrative that was unfolding around him. Varma's influence was far-reaching, and now Ankit had become an unwilling player in a dangerous game that he could scarcely comprehend. He slowed as he approached the mill, squinting into the gloom. The silhouette of a figure was barely visible against the backdrop of the old stone structure. Ankit's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to approach with caution, his hand instinctively reaching for the pocketknife he'd started carrying ever since the confrontation at the temple. The figure moved, stepping into the dim light of the alley that ran alongside the mill. Ankit's breath caught in his throat as he saw who it was. Chloe. Her silhouette was unmistakable, slender, poised, the familiar shape of someone he thought he could trust, someone he thought was far removed from this web of lies. But there she stood, her eyes shadowed by the dim light, a determined expression etched on her face. Chloe? His voice broke the silence, confusion coloring his words. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward, glancing around the area as if checking for any sign of danger. Finally, she met his gaze. I didn't want to bring you into this, Ankit, she said, her voice soft but laced with an undeniable edge. But you're already too far in. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Chloe knew? What do you mean? He asked, his voice barely a whisper as the reality of the situation began to sink in. How long have you been involved in this? Her lips tightened, her eyes flickering with a mixture of guilt and resolve. I've been watching you and your family. Ever since your father got the invitation from Varma. I didn't want you to get hurt, but there's no stopping it now. She paused, her gaze shifting to the old mill behind her. I'm part of a group that's been trying to stop Project V from the inside. We knew you were getting too close, and we needed to make sure you understood what you're up against. Ankit stared at her, his mind reeling. This was more than he had bargained for. Chloe, my best friend, was part of a resistance group? And she'd been hiding this from me all this time? His thoughts were spinning, a whirlwind of disbelief and hurt. Why didn't you tell me, Chloe? Why keep it from me? Her eyes softened, but there was no mistaking the urgency in her voice. Because you weren't ready to hear it. I couldn't risk pulling you into this mess before you were truly in danger. But now, she cut herself off, her voice faltering as she glanced over her shoulder nervously. Now it's too late. Varma is already onto us. Onto you. A long silence stretched between them as Ankit processed what she had said. His emotions were a tumultuous sea, betrayal, confusion, anger, each wave crashing into the next. I've come too far. I can't stop now. A dark laugh escaped his lips, though it was tinged with bitterness. Guess it's good to know I'm not alone in this fight. His voice was low, but there was a steady resolve to it now. You've been running the same race, huh? Both of them stared at each other. But why? Why are you involved in this, and since when? As soon as he asked her that, a thought crossed his mind. Don't tell me your brother. Chloe nodded, her expression serious. We all have our roles to play. But we need to be careful. Varma's reach is longer than we realize. If we're going to stop Project V, we need to work together. Ankit took a deep breath. I couldn't believe she was always laughing and looking happy despite being in such agony herself. But at least she could have consulted me with her issues. He didn't have all the answers, but there was one thing he was sure of now, he was not alone in this fight. I'm with you, Ankit said, the words feeling heavier than they ever had before. We'll take him down together. As the cold wind swept around them, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay, Ankit and Chloe stood in the shadow of the old mill. The weight of the battle ahead pressed down on them, but there was no turning back. They had crossed the point of no return.
Akumah Audiobooks.
You are listening to Anvil of Redemption, written by Akumah and voiced over by Sara.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Chapter 5, The Shadow's Game. The faint flicker of the desk lamp cast long shadows across Ankit's room, its glow illuminating the screen where lines of code scrolled relentlessly, as if mocking him. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling with the weight of the encrypted files on his screen. Every keystroke felt like a ticking clock, counting down to something he could neither see nor fully comprehend. What's all this? And my hand trembles just by looking at the files. The thought lingering in his mind like an uninvited guest. Aisha was right. Varma's empire is vast, and I'm just a speck in the middle of it. He had known for days that the trail he was following was dangerous, but now, as the hidden data began to unfold before his eyes, he could feel the air in his room grow heavy, like it was pressing down on him. His thoughts whirled in chaotic spirals. The encrypted files that had once seemed like a distant puzzle now seemed to unravel themselves with terrifying clarity. With a hesitant breath, Ankit leaned closer to the screen. Epsilon. The word sent a chill through him. His fingers paused as his mind raced to process what he was seeing. He scrolled through the blueprint for a facility he had once walked by on the outskirts of the city, a place he had always thought was abandoned. It had once been a research lab, a building filled with history and whispers. But now, it was something far more sinister. The facility was more than just a laboratory. It was the heart of something monumental, something dark. The blueprints revealed it was a high-security area, a complex network of rooms and corridors that were designed for one purpose only: containment. Control. Epsilon is the key. This is where it all begins. Ankit's breath hitched as his eyes scanned the rows of information that continued to pour onto his screen. The blueprints for the facility were not just about storage or research, they were about creating something. A hybrid. Part human, part machine, but fully under the control of whoever held the keys to the facility. And at the center of it all was Project V. They're not just controlling memories, Ankit thought, his mind reeling. They're creating an army. An army of hybrids who will obey without question. But why though? The words blurred together on the screen, but Ankit's brain processed them with chilling precision. The project was bigger than he had imagined, global in scope, reaching far beyond the confines of Jamshedpur. Powerful organizations had their fingers in this: political figures, financial backers, military connections. Varma's empire extended far beyond the city, and Ankit had unwittingly stepped into the eye of the storm. For the first time after resolving his determination, he started second-guessing himself. Why did I even start this? His thoughts spiraled. What if my family gets dragged into this? What if I expose this, and people start getting hurt? The thought was enough to make him freeze. His mind raced, the gravity of the situation hitting him all at once. He had no way of knowing who was already involved, who would come after him, or what Varma's people would do once they found out he had the drive. Every inch closer to the truth meant more risk, more danger, not just for him, but for everyone around him. Well, I'm not backing down now, he thought, his hand tightening around the mouse, clicking through file after file. I can't think about what-ifs. Too many people are already caught in this web. It was then that a new message flashed across his phone screen, a sudden buzz that cut through the silence of his room like a knife. Get out. They know you're onto them. They'll be at your house soon. Aisha's words were stark, concise, but they hit him like a punch to the gut. Panic flooded his veins as he glanced nervously over his shoulder. His heart started to hammer in his chest, louder than it had ever been before. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was in this, fully immersed, and the target had already been placed squarely on his back. Ankit's breath came in short, shallow bursts as his mind scrambled for a plan. There was no time. No time to think. He grabbed the hidden drive from his desk, slipping it into the pocket of his jacket with shaking hands. He shoved his chair back, the legs scraping against the floor with a loud screech, before moving quickly to the window. He paused, casting a last glance at the blinking cursor on his computer screen. He had uncovered more than he should have. But that knowledge would be useless if he couldn't survive the night. I can't let them get me. Not like this. With a deep breath, he opened the window and climbed out, the cool night air rushing over him as he moved into the alley behind his house. His heart pounded, but his mind was sharp. He knew the streets. He knew the shortcuts. He had to stay hidden. He couldn't afford to be caught. As he turned a corner, his phone buzzed again, but he ignored it, focusing on the sound of car engines revving in the distance. His instinct screamed at him to keep moving, but just as he turned another corner, 3 dark figures appeared from the shadows, blocking his path. They wore tactical gear, their faces obscured by masks. Varma's men. Ankit froze, his body going rigid with fear. His mind screamed at him to run, but the words from Aisha echoed in his mind. They'll be at your house soon. They knew he was onto them. They were closing in. Damn it. What now? Ankit's breath quickened as he scanned his surroundings, looking for an escape. The alley was narrow, and the men were too close. There was no time to think, no time to plan. The only thing left to do was act. His gaze fell to the dumpster beside him. Without thinking, he darted toward it, pressing his back against the cold, hard metal, trying to stifle the panic rising in his chest. His breath was ragged, his heartbeat loud in his ears. Please, don't let them find me, he prayed, though he knew it was only a matter of time. The men were getting closer. Ankit could hear their boots crunching against the gravel, the faint click of flashlights being switched on. His fingers clenched around the drive in his pocket, and he could feel the weight of it, both the physical weight and the burden of the truth it carried. Suddenly, a voice whispered from the shadows. You're not alone. Ankit's heart skipped a beat, his pulse racing even faster. He twisted around to find a figure stepping into the light. Raj. Raj? Ankit's voice was barely a whisper, disbelief filling his chest. Raj had been an enigma, a figure who had disappeared from his life years ago. The last time Ankit had seen him, Raj had been deep in the world of tech, working for Varma's operations. But now, he was here, standing in the dark alley with an aura of calm that seemed to pierce the tension around them. Follow me, Raj urged, motioning with a quick nod. There was no time to question him. Ankit did as told, following Raj as they sprinted down the alley, the sounds of their pursuers now close behind. But Raj moved with purpose, weaving through the narrow streets with an uncanny sense of direction. Ankit's breath came in ragged bursts as they ran, his legs burning with the effort. But Raj kept a steady pace, his face set with determination. He knew where they were going, and that was all that mattered. They stopped and hid behind a building. Raj took out his laptop and turned on the cameras which were being blocked by Varma's men. They have to step back for now. Looking at Raj, many memories flashed past Ankit's mind, but he dismissed all of it, and asked, "Who are you working for?" His voice hoarse as they turned another corner. Raj didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed ahead. "I'm not working for anyone anymore," he said finally. "But I know Varma. And I know how to bring him down." Ankit's mind raced with questions, but Raj wasn't slowing down. They reached a dilapidated building, the entrance barely noticeable against the night. Raj pulled open the door, ushering Ankit inside. The dim light from a laptop flickered inside, illuminating a small, cluttered room. "You're safe here. For now," Raj said, locking the door behind them. Ankit collapsed into a chair, his mind reeling. What had just happened? And how did Raj know I was in danger? "Let me have a look at the drive you are carrying." Ankit was startled at first, but Raj gave a look of a soldier who was fighting on the war field on his own. Ankit had no choice but to trust him as he handed the drive to him. "It's a copy anyway, there's no harm in it." Times. Ankit sat in the dimly lit room, his breath shallow and his pulse racing. The screen in front of him flickered as Raj connected the hidden drive to a laptop, the harsh white glow illuminating his face. His mind was still reeling from the escape, his heart still pounding from the adrenaline of the chase. He hadn't even had time to process what had just happened, and yet, here he was, inside a safe house. Raj's fingers moved with practiced precision as he accessed the encrypted files. The soft click of the keyboard was the only sound in the otherwise silent room. Ankit leaned forward, his eyes locked on the screen, hoping to find something, anything, that would give him a way out. The walls seemed to close in on him as the weight of the situation pressed down harder. Raj finally spoke, his voice low and steady. Epsilon is the key and is much more than I initially thought, Ankit. It's not just about memory manipulation. It's about total control. Varma wants to create an army, humans with machine-like precision, their memories rewritten to serve his every command. Ankit's chest tightened. The words hit him hard. The implications of what Raj had just said were staggering. Varma's plan wasn't just about power, it was about domination on a scale he had never imagined. His mind raced back to the encrypted files he had been decoding earlier. The facility on the outskirts of Jamshedpur, the one that had once been a research lab. The blueprints had shown rows of high-tech equipment, cages, and labs that seemed too advanced for their time. He hadn't understood the full extent of it then, but now, with Raj's words echoing in his mind, it all started to make sense. They're going to turn people into weapons, Ankit murmured, his voice thick with disbelief. Raj nodded grimly. That's exactly what they're doing. Project V, the Epsilon project, those are just the beginning. Varma's planning to launch this on a global scale. He's already infiltrated powerful organizations, politics, finance, military. He's got connections everywhere. Ankit's mind whirled. So what now? What do we do? Raj sat back in the chair, his expression unreadable. Now we figure out how to stop him. But first, you need to understand something, this is bigger than just us, bigger than Jamshedpur. The moment Varma's Epsilon project is activated, everything changes. It's not just an army. It's control over humanity itself. Ankit's mind tried to process the gravity of the situation, but it felt like too much to bear. He was just a teenager, no different than anyone else in the city. And yet, here he was, with the weight of an entire world on his shoulders. He had no training for this. No experience in warfare, no understanding of the intricacies of power on this scale. He was just trying to survive. Can I really do anything? Ankit asked himself. His eyes flicked to the screen, to the blueprints of the facility Raj had opened. The images blurred for a moment as his heart raced. At the center of it all, a bold label screamed at him, Project Epsilon, Activation Phase 1, Immediate Execution. It was happening now. He wasn't ready. He didn't know if he ever could be. This isn't your fight, Ankit. He could hear his father's voice in his head. But it was too late for that now. He started fiddling with his fingers, which caught Raj's attention. You're thinking too much, Raj said suddenly, breaking through Ankit's spiraling thoughts. I get it. I was in your shoes once. Scared. Unprepared. But you don't have a choice now. We all have a role to play in this. Everyone has a role to play. He is similar to Aisha. Ankit nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. He didn't know what role he had to play. All he knew was that things had escalated too quickly for him to back out. Raj closed the laptop with a snap and stood up. We need to move fast. Varma won't wait. You saw how quickly his men found you. We've got to stay one step ahead. Ankit stood up as well, his legs unsteady. But how? Where do we even start? Raja's eyes narrowed. We start with the network. There are people, hackers, activists, former employees, people who have been fighting against Varma from the inside. We need to find them, get them on our side, and figure out where Varma is hiding his most dangerous assets. And expose it to the whole world to see. He stepped closer to Ankit. Apart from these, we can't do anything anyway. Or do you want to fight them head-on? Not really, but I also want to do something, Ankit said, his voice firmer now. Let's do it. Raj gave him a grim smile. That's the spirit. But remember, Ankit, Varma's not just a criminal. He's a monster. And monsters don't stop. We'll have to be smarter, quicker, and more ruthless than him. No hesitation. No mercy. Ankit swallowed hard. He wasn't sure if he could be ruthless. He wasn't sure if he had what it took to fight a man like Varma. But there was something inside him now, something that burned with determination. He couldn't let this continue. He had to fight. Let's go, Ankit said, his voice steady now. What's the plan? Raj motioned toward the door. We've got a safe house nearby. We'll regroup there, make a plan. We'll need allies. People who are willing to fight. We can't do this alone. The two of them slipped out of the building, blending into the shadows as they made their way through the narrow streets of Jamshedpur. The city felt different now. Every corner seemed to hide a new threat, every passing shadow seemed to hold a potential danger. The journey ahead was uncertain. Every step they took was one step closer to danger, and Ankit had no illusions about the risks. But he wasn't the same person he had been when this all started. He wasn't the scared teenager who had been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was someone else now. Someone with a purpose. And he would do whatever it took to stop Varma, and to save the people he loved.
Akumah Audiobooks.
You are listening to Anvil of Redemption, written by Akumah and voiced over by Sara.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Chapter 6, The Final Gambit. The dim light in the room flickered erratically, casting long, jagged shadows on the cracked concrete walls. Ankit's gaze remained fixed on the laptop screen in front of him, the soft hum of the fan and the occasional clatter of keys filling the silence. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, frozen as if he were unwilling to disrupt the fragile peace that surrounded him. The encrypted files, now nearly decoded, contained disturbing details about Varma's grand design. Epsilon wasn't just a program, it is a radioactive device and a plan to control entire populations by rewriting memories of millions at once. It wasn't just a conspiracy, it was a nightmare unfolding in real time. Huff, this keeps getting bigger and bigger, Ankit thought while letting out a deep sigh. The clock was ticking, and the stakes had never been higher. And I'm in the middle of it. His fingers twitched as he began to type again, methodically entering the passcodes to access another file. The staccato rhythm of the keys echoed in the quiet room, a constant reminder of the urgency pressing down on him. The low buzz of the fluorescent bulb above his head flickered again, as if in warning. The air in the room was thick with the smell of dust and old coffee, mingling with the sharp scent of his sweat. Everything feels wrong, but I have to continue. Too many lives are at stake. I have to keep going. Ankit wiped his face, trying to shake off the exhaustion gnawing at him. How much am I willing to sacrifice? The question lingered, echoing in his thoughts, growing louder with each passing minute. His family was at risk. His friends, his life, had become part of something far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. He clenched his jaw. There's no turning back now. Suddenly, the familiar voice of Raj broke through the silence. You found something? Ankit glanced up, meeting Raj's eyes. His friend's expression was a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Not yet. Just getting through the last bit of the data, Ankit said, gesturing toward the screen. But it's getting worse. Raj crossed the room and sat across from him, rubbing his temples. I know. The more we uncover, the more it feels like we're digging our own graves. A soft beep from a laptop jolted him back from exhaustion. A new file had been decrypted. The coordinates flashed on the screen, and his heart skipped a beat. This is it. The coordinates pointed to a location, a secret base, hidden deep within the outskirts of the city. Ankit's breath quickened as he studied the map, trying to make sense of it. This is it. The place where the resistance is hiding. Raj leaned over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing as he studied the coordinates. That's the one. It's been on the radar for a while. We've been trying to pinpoint it. But now we know for sure. Ankit's mind raced. The resistance was closer than they thought. But how do we trust them? He remembered the warning Aisha had given him before he left the safety of their home. Don't trust anyone too easily, Ankit. There are too many playing both sides. His gut twisted with doubt. What if we're walking straight into a trap? Raj seemed to read his hesitation. I get it. But we don't have a choice. This is our chance to hit back at Varma. I have compiled multiple sets of evidence, but it's not enough to crush the Varma's empire. We can't do this alone. Ankit knew Raj was right, and time was running out. They had to act. I'll try to set up the meeting with the resistance head, Shalini, Ankit said, trying to ignore the unease churning in his stomach. Raj gave a tight nod. Be ready. If she's genuine, this could be the turning point we need. If she's genuine. The thought hung in the air like a dark cloud. The two of them moved swiftly through the dark streets of Jamshedpur, the shadows swallowing them whole. The city felt colder than usual tonight, as though it had sensed the tension creeping through the air. The calm before the storm, Ankit's eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. As they approached the underground base, the smell of damp concrete filled his nostrils. The faint hum of machinery vibrated through the floors, the low murmur of voices in the distance barely audible over the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. The place felt like it existed in a different reality, hidden beneath the surface, a world apart from the one Ankit had known. The air was thick with the smell of machinery, rust, and something else, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. This is it, Raj said softly. His voice seemed too loud in the quiet, as if it could shatter the fragile calm that hung over the base. They stopped in front of a steel door, its surface scratched and worn. A small camera buzzed above, and Ankit's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every inch of this place felt like a trap, a delicate web waiting to snap shut around us. Raj nodded at Ankit. You ready? Ankit swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. I don't know if I'll ever be ready for this. His voice was hoarse, tinged with the bitterness of his own doubt. The door slid open, revealing a dim hallway. The light from their flashlights flickered as they stepped inside, the walls lined with faded posters of past revolutions and forgotten battles. The atmosphere was heavy, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were filled with secrets. They reached the end of the corridor, where a woman stood waiting. Her face was partially obscured by a hood, but Ankit could see the hardness in her eyes. Shalini. I'm glad you made it, she said, her voice low and steady. Let's get straight to the point, Raj said, his tone sharp. You've got information on Epsilon. We need it. Now. Shalini's lips curled into a faint smile, though there was no warmth in it. I know. And I'll give it to you. But first, we need to talk. What you're dealing with isn't just a military project. It's a whole new level of control, of power. Ankit felt a shiver crawl down his spine. What do you mean? Shalini's eyes met his, and in that moment, Ankit felt the weight of her words settle over him. Varma's plan isn't just about enhanced soldiers. He's using human consciousness as a weapon. Memories, entire histories, are being rewritten to control populations. She paused, as if giving him time to absorb the magnitude of her revelation. They're taking children. Orphans. They're erasing their identities, their lives, and replacing them with false memories, loyalty to Varma. Ankit's stomach churned. Children. Innocent children. The words hung in the air like a poisoned arrow. This is no longer just a fight for survival. This is a fight for their souls. His hand clenched into a fist, his knuckles white. Shalini's eyes softened, as though sensing his growing anger. I know it's a lot to take in. But this is the truth. And we need to stop it before it's too late. It's too late for them already, Ankit thought, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. But there was no time to grieve. There was only time to act. Ankit is sickened by the news. He feels the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. His mission has gone from personal revenge to a fight to save innocent lives. The realization of what is at stake deepens his resolve, but also makes him feel more isolated. The lab had become a cacophony of chaos. Gunshots echoed through the steel walls, the sharp crack of bullets colliding with metal filling the air. Ankit's heart raced, every beat thundering in his chest. This is it. This is the moment. His fingers gripped the edge of the terminal, the screen flickering with the data transfer, as a deafening alarm screamed above the chaos. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes, but he couldn't afford to blink. Not now. Behind him, the muffled sound of Raj's voice broke through the static of the firefight. Go, Ankit. Finish this. The words rang like a bell, echoing in the midst of the madness. Ankit barely registered Raj's sacrifice. His mind, sharp with purpose, was fixed on the task ahead. He had to finish the transfer. The encrypted server they'd set up was their only lifeline, their only chance to expose the truth about Varma's Epsilon project. This is it. The world will know. But even as he worked frantically, every fiber of his being screamed with fear. What if we're too late? His mind flashed to the destruction Varma had already brought. The countless lives affected by the project, the mind control, the manipulation, the destruction. His family. Raj. They were all tangled in the web that Varma had spun. Will all this be enough? He didn't have the luxury of questioning himself. The transfer was nearing completion. He could see the final percentage ticking up on the screen, each number climbing with agonizing slowness. Just a little more. Hold on. A deafening explosion ripped through the air, sending a wave of heat and debris crashing through the room. Ankit's body was thrown backward, slamming into the steel wall. His vision swam as he fought to regain control, the world spinning around him. But even as he staggered to his feet, his gaze locked on the terminal. No. Not now. I can't lose this. A voice cut through the haze of noise. Varma. His voice was calm, but it carried an icy edge. You think you've won, Ankit? You're nothing more than a pawn in my game. You're all expendable. His laugh was cold, like the sound of ice cracking. Ankit's blood boiled. I will not let him win. Not after everything. He stumbled toward the terminal again, his fingers brushing the keyboard, praying for the transfer to complete quickly. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. A sudden flash of red light bathed the room, and the terminal screen flickered and died. The transfer had stalled. No! The panic surged in his chest. He slammed his fist against the desk, the reality of the situation sinking in. Varma had triggered a fail-safe. Ankit's eyes shot to the door, where a new group of guards had entered, weapons raised. They weren't the only threat. The walls of the lab were closing in, the heavy, metallic doors beginning to seal off all exits. "We're trapped. Finish the transfer, or die trying." Varma's voice was smug, almost playful, as if he relished the agony Ankit was enduring. "I'll never give him the satisfaction." "Who likes to play with people's lives?" Ankit swore silently. A plan began to form in his mind, fueled by the adrenaline pumping through his veins. "I have one chance left. The encrypted server." He had to get the data to it, no matter the cost. His hands moved with urgency, his pulse racing as he worked quickly to override the system. The guards were closing in, but Ankit was focused, he couldn't afford distractions. The screech of metal against metal echoed through the room as the doors clanged shut. There was no escape now, no running. This is the end. Then, as if guided by some unseen force, a blur of movement shot past Ankit, and the world seemed to freeze for a moment. Raj. Raj was charging at Varma, his face set with grim determination. His voice rang out in a shout. "Ankit, do it now." The guards turned to face Raj, and for a split second, Ankit saw his friend's form cut through the chaos, holding off the attackers with a speed and ferocity that seemed almost inhuman. "Raj, no." His heart screamed, but he couldn't afford to hesitate. Ankit's fingers danced across the keyboard again, the seconds ticking by, each one heavier than the last. The transfer was almost complete. Just a little more. Raj's struggle was fierce, his movements desperate as he faced off against Varma's men. Gunshots rang out, but Raj didn't falter. He kept fighting, kept holding them back. Ankit could hear him shouting, could see him throwing himself into the fray with everything he had, and for a fleeting moment, Ankit thought of all the times Raj had stood by him, through every challenge, every doubt. He's giving everything for this. For us. And that's when Ankit knew. He couldn't stop now. He couldn't let Raj's sacrifice be in vain. With one last surge of effort, Ankit pressed the final command. The screen flashed green, and a message blinked across the terminal, "Transfer complete." The data had been sent. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. The alarms, the gunfire, the screams, they all faded into a distant hum. The truth was out. Varma's empire was crumbling. But then, the reality of the situation hit Ankit like a hammer. Raj. His mind snapped back to the present, to the figure of his friend still holding off the guards. Raj was bleeding, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his face contorted with pain as he fended off the attackers. Raj. Ankit cried, running toward him, but he was too late. Raj collapsed to the floor, the weight of the battle too much for him to bear. The sight of his friend, lying motionless on the cold steel floor, shattered something inside Ankit. He sank to his knees beside Raj, his hands trembling as he tried to check for a pulse. But deep down, he knew. Raj was gone. He was so focused on the task that he hadn't noticed, but 6 of Shalini's men and 2 of Aisha's men were dead, while the rest were barely hanging on to stand. A wave of grief washed over him. He looked at himself, not a single scratch on him. This is my fault. His mind screamed the accusation over and over, but the truth was undeniable. Raj had died for him, for the cause. He gave everything. For me. The sirens outside grew louder, the sound of approaching authorities signaling the end of Varma's reign. His empire was falling apart, the truth about the Epsilon project now broadcast to the world. But Ankit couldn't focus on that. Not now. The battle is won, but the cost is too much. A hand on his shoulder pulled him from his grief-stricken thoughts. Shalini stood beside him, her expression hard, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. We have to go, Ankit. They're coming. Raj would want you to finish this. Ankit nodded, barely registering the words. He stood slowly, his eyes lingering on Raj's still form. For a moment, everything in the world seemed insignificant compared to the loss he felt. But then, he straightened, wiping the tears from his eyes. For Raj and other comrades. He had to keep moving. The fight wasn't over. The authorities arrived just as the last of Varma's men were subdued, their weapons useless against the tide of law enforcement flooding into the facility. Varma himself, realizing the jig was up, attempted to flee, but it was already too late. His empire had crumbled, and the truth had been exposed. The Epsilon project was no longer a secret. The people will know what he's done. Ankit walked through the wreckage of the facility, his heart heavy with the weight of what had been lost. Raj. The countless others whose lives had been shattered by Varma's ambition. And yet, there was a strange feeling of liberation too. The truth had been set free. Varma's grasp on the city, on the people, was finally broken.
Akumah Audiobooks.
You are listening to Anvil of Redemption, written by Akumah and voiced over by Sara.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Epilogue. A new dawn, 3 months later. Jamshedpur. The first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, gently painting the streets of Jamshedpur with shades of gold. The city, once alive with the heavy hum of industry, now seemed to breathe a little easier, as though the air itself had been cleansed. The scars of the past were still etched into the memories of its people, Varma's reign of terror, the conspiracies, the battles fought for freedom, but those scars were healing. Like the city itself, the people were learning to rebuild, to move on from the darkness that had once threatened to consume them. The government had restructured Jamshedpur's leadership, dismantling the old, corrupt systems that had held the city captive for so long. New faces filled the halls of power, faces that were determined to lead with transparency, honesty, and integrity. And though it was a slow process, the people could feel the change. There was hope in the air now, a sense of possibility. I'm sure Varma is the one behind the disappearance of my parents. But I can't say for sure either. The note said they will be back soon, so I hope they will come back. Ankit walked through the streets frustrated, his footsteps light despite the weight of the past that still lingered in his heart. He wasn't the boy he had been when he first walked these streets, no longer consumed by vengeance, no longer driven by the desire to destroy. He was a young man now, his eyes carrying the weight of everything he had learned, everything he had fought for. His eyes were no longer clouded by anger or fear, but rather filled with a quiet purpose. As he moved through the city, he noticed the small changes that had taken root in the wake of everything that had transpired, the new community programs aimed at rebuilding neighborhoods, the small businesses that were starting to thrive again, the children playing in the streets without fear. It was a city recovering, and for the first time in a long time, Ankit felt like he was a part of that recovery. There was a place in the world for him now, a place where his past no longer defined him, where his future was something he could shape for himself and for those who had suffered alongside him. He was no longer haunted by the shadows of Varma, and though the memories of his loss, of Raj's sacrifice, still weighed on him, he no longer let them define him. The city was changing, and so was he. He stopped at a small cafe, his eyes scanning the bustling streets as he sipped his coffee. The breeze blew through his hair, cool and refreshing, and he allowed himself to relax for a moment. The fight was over. Varma's empire had crumbled, the truth had been exposed, and the people who had once cowered in fear now stood tall. Ankit smiled softly to himself, the corners of his mouth turning upward. It had taken everything, everything he had lost, everything he had fought for, but Jamshedpur was free. And with that freedom came the opportunity for healing, for rebuilding. He thought back to the days when he had been consumed by hatred, when the thought of revenge had been his only driving force. Now, as he looked at the city, he understood that the real victory wasn't in taking down Varma, it was in the way the people had come together, in the way they had fought not just for justice, but for the future. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. He glanced down and saw a message from Shalini. He hadn't seen her much lately, but they'd exchanged occasional updates. She had become an integral part of the team working to ensure Varma's crimes were fully accounted for, working alongside legal and political teams to dismantle the remnants of his empire. "We did it. The last of his associates were arrested today. The city is finally safe. But I couldn't track down your parents' location." Ankit's heart warmed at the news. Finally safe. It was a thought he hadn't dared to entertain during those long, difficult months. The path to peace had been fraught with struggle, but now, at last, it seemed that the city was on the right track. Raja's legacy. Later that afternoon, Ankit made his way to a small public square in the heart of the city, a place where people often gathered to enjoy the sun or sit and talk with friends. He had been there many times before, but today, there was something different about the place. It was quieter, almost reverent. In the center of the square stood a plaque, engraved with words that made Ankit's chest tighten with emotion. In memory of Raj Mehra, a friend, a hero, whose sacrifice helped change the course of Jamshedpur's future. Ankit knelt before the plaque, his heart heavy with the weight of memories, memories of his friend, his brother in arms, who had given everything for this moment, for this future. Raja's sacrifice had been the price of freedom, and it was one that Ankit would carry with him for the rest of his life. He could almost hear Raja's voice, the voice that had always been there for him when he needed it most. "We're in this together, Ankit. We'll see it through." Ankit closed his eyes for a moment, letting the memories flood over him. He didn't know if he would ever stop feeling the pain of losing Raj, but he had learned to carry it with him, to honor it with every step he took toward a better future. And it wasn't just Ankit who carried Raj's memory. The resistance that had sprung up in the wake of Varma's fall was still strong, still committed to ensuring that no other city or person would suffer under the rule of a tyrant. Raj's legacy lived on in every person who stood for justice, for the truth. In a way, Raj had become the foundation on which this new world was being built. Ankit touched the plaque lightly, whispering the words that had become his mantra, "We did it, my friend. We freed the city." Shalini's role. Shalini, once a girl caught in the web of Varma's manipulation, had found her own place in the new world. She was no longer the frightened girl who had stumbled through the darkness. Now, she was a leader in her own right, working tirelessly to ensure that the remnants of Varma's influence were erased from the city. Ankit met with her occasionally, mostly to exchange updates on the progress being made. Though their bond wasn't as close as friends, there was still a mutual respect between them. She had grown into someone strong, someone unafraid to stand up for what was right. She had become an essential part of the movement that was rebuilding the city, helping to dismantle the old systems of corruption and ensure that the future would be shaped by those who valued justice over power. There was a connection forged in struggle, and though their paths had diverged in many ways, Ankit knew that Shalini was part of the new world they were building together. Chloe, Aisha and the survivors were also supporting Shalini in her cause as a united team. All of them had the same situation, so they got along pretty well. A moment of hope. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the city, Ankit stood on the rooftop of his family's home, looking out over the skyline. The city was quieter now, more peaceful, but there was still a sense of energy in the air. The future was uncertain, but it was a future they could shape. For the first time in years, Ankit felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel, a sense of hope. He had survived. He had faced the darkness, and now, in the light of this new day, he could see a path forward. The battle had been long, and the cost had been high, but the storm had passed. The city, like him, was healing. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he was no longer a slave to the past. The horizon was open, and it was his to shape. Ankit spoke softly to the wind, as though speaking to his lost friend. "We did it, my friend. We freed the city. Now, it's time to build something worth living for." He looked up to the sky, where the stars were beginning to twinkle, and for the first time in a long time, the world seemed to promise that redemption was possible, that no matter how dark the night, a new dawn would always rise. The story of Jamshedpur, and of Ankit. Hopefully this is the end, or will Varma be bailed out of jail, and what happened to his mother and father? Do you really believe that?
Akumah Audiobooks.
Thank you for your time and keep listening to more audiobooks from the playlist above.